The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Verity Callow had always considered the most dishonest day of the week. It promised nothing, delivered nothing, and yet presented itself as a day like any other. This particular Tuesday delivered a commission from the estate of the Duke of Marne, conveyed in the handwriting of his secretary, a Mr. Pelham, whose penmanship suggested a man who had been told he wrote beautifully and had never recovered from the compliment. The terms were simple. The library at Marne Hall had not been properly catalogued in over a decade. The previous librarian, a Mr. Hargrove, had worked under the old Duke for 7 years before that gentleman died, and the commission lapsed, leaving behind 3 incomplete ledgers, a system of his own private devising that no one else could decipher, and a note in the margin of the 4th ledger that read, "God forgive me for the East Wing." The current Duke required someone to begin again from the beginning. He required discretion. He required competence. The fee was generous enough to make Verity read the letter twice, and she was not a woman who needed to read things twice. She accepted by return post. She did not tell her brother Thomas where she was going, only that she would be in Wiltshire for the season, possibly longer. Thomas was 21, legitimately anxious about money, and illegitimately anxious about everything else. Verity loved him completely and told him approximately 40% of what she was actually doing at any given moment. This had served them both well. The letters were what mattered. Letters written decades ago by a man now dead to a woman now dead, describing a marriage that had taken place in a village church in Dorset, before witnesses who were, in the main, also dead. The marriage that made Thomas legitimate, the marriage that made him heir to their father's estate, rather than a byblow with a courtesy education and a precarious future. The letters had gone into a collection purchased en masse by the previous Duke of Marne's secretary in 1789. The collection had gone into the library. Whatever Hargrove had done in the subsequent years, the East Wing had gone untouched. Verity knew this because she had spent 14 months finding it out. She also knew that if she arrived at Marne Hall as a woman looking for letters, establishing her brother's right to an inheritance, she would be shown the door before she reached the 3rd step. But a hired cataloguer, given full access to every shelf, every box, every loose folio in the East Wing, that was another matter entirely. She was not proud of the deception, but she was practical about it. Marne Hall revealed itself slowly. The drive was too long and too well maintained for a house that did not want to impress. The grounds opened gradually. First the lake, then the formal gardens, clipped with an exactness that suggested discipline rather than pleasure, and finally the house itself, grey stone, 3 stories, more windows than was strictly necessary, and the particular silence of a building in which the inhabitants had long since stopped talking to one another. The housekeeper, a Mrs. Alton, met her at the door, perhaps 60, with the expression of a woman unlikely to reveal her secrets on short acquaintance. "Miss Callow, His Grace is not available this afternoon. I am to show you the library and the rooms prepared for you. You may begin tomorrow." "Of course," said Verity. "He has asked that you keep to the library and your own rooms in the East Wing." "Naturally." Mrs. Alton paused, apparently having expected resistance. "Dinner will be sent to your rooms." "That is quite all right. You will find the library in some disorder." "I would be surprised to find it otherwise, given the circumstances." Mrs. Alton looked at her for a moment, with something that was not quite approval but was in that neighbourhood. She turned and led Verity inside. The library was extraordinary, not in the sense that libraries sometimes were, curated and arranged for beauty. This was extraordinary the way a catastrophe was. The scale of it stopped you in the doorway. Floor-to-ceiling shelving on 3 walls, a mezzanine running the full perimeter above, and stacked along every available surface the accumulated acquisitions of 4 generations of Thorns, none of whom had apparently met a collection they could resist. Maps rolled into gaps between books, unlabeled boxes on the floor, folios leaning against cases in arrangements that defied structural logic. And above the fireplace, where another house might have hung a portrait, a painting of a horse, Verity stood in the doorway with her thumb pressed to the spine of her notebook. Then she stepped inside and began. She did not meet the Duke of Marne until her 3rd day, by which point she had catalogued approximately 400 volumes from the south wall, identified 2 first editions of genuine rarity, and determined that Hargrove's system had been based on acquisition dates recorded in a cipher on the inside back covers, which explained the East Wing note, since that wing's acquisitions predated the cipher's introduction. She was in the mezzanine on her knees before a stack of unsorted folios when she heard the door open below. She finished her notation, pressed her thumb to her ledger, and looked down. He was standing in the middle of the room looking up at her. Nicholas Thorne, Duke of Marne, was not what the journey had prepared her to expect. She had constructed, from the commission letter and the house and the housekeeper, a picture of a man who matched his surroundings, cold, contained, old in the way that power made men old. The man below her was perhaps 34, tall, dark-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had decided that other people should do most of the moving. From the height of the mezzanine in the library's low light, she could make out little more than that his eyes were dark. He did not greet her. He said, "You are higher than I expected." "The mezzanine is the logical starting point," Verity said. "Establishing a chronological baseline before tackling the ground floor will save approximately 3 weeks of reorganization later." "You have been here 3 days." "I determined it on the first day. The second and third confirmed it." Below her, Nicholas looked at the shelving, the ledger, the stacked folios, and then back at her. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted fractionally. "Come down when you reach a stopping point," he said. "I should like to know what else you have determined." "I can tell you from here." "Miss Callow," his voice was level, "come down." Verity pressed her thumb to the ledger. She came down. He did not invite her to sit. She sat anyway in the chair nearest the window, which had the best light. He remained standing. At closer range, she revised her impression. His eyes were a dark hazel, more brown than green, she thought, though the morning light made it difficult to be certain. "The East Wing," he said. "Here's where I expect the most interesting material to be. The acquisition dates suggest it was the 4th Duke's primary collection, bought in bulk from several estates, mixed provenance. It will require the most time." "How much time?" "For the East Wing alone, 6 months, the whole library, a year, possibly 14 months. Hargrove managed the cataloguing in 4 years under my father. Hargrove left the East Wing untouched and died before returning to it." She kept her voice even. "I have a system. His was his own." "What system?" She told him. It was not a brief explanation, and she watched him while she talked, to see at what point he stopped following and began merely nodding. He did not nod. He listened with the quality of attention she associated with people who were genuinely interested or genuinely suspicious. When she finished, he said, "You have done this before." "Lord Fenwick's library in Bath. Before that, the Alderton collection in Oxford. I can provide further references if those submitted were insufficient." "They were sufficient." He turned from the window. "I will want weekly reports, written, and the East Wing. It contains personal correspondence, letters. You will flag anything of a personal nature without reading it." "Yes." "I am serious, Miss Callow." "To your grace," she said. "I came here to catalogue a library. I did not come here to read private correspondence." She said it clearly and steadily, and she meant only 9/10 of it. The weeks settled into a pattern. Verity catalogued. Nicholas did not appear. Then he appeared, asked questions, and left again. He rode every morning before she came down. She found, despite herself, that she was interested in the library in ways that had nothing to do with the letters. The Thorne family had been reading things for 4 generations and leaving evidence everywhere. There were marginalia, not the careful kind, but the kind that meant something was being thought. An edition of Locke with the word nonsense, written twice in the same margin, once in a firm 18th century hand, and once beneath it in a different hand, as if a later reader had agreed with his ancestor. A novel she had read herself, with the final paragraph underlined and nothing written beside it, just the line marked and the blankness of someone who had not been able to say what it meant. She made note of it without meaning to, the way she always marked her place, thumb to the page. She was still thinking about the underlining when Nicholas walked into the library at 11 on a Wednesday morning, which was unusual. "I am going to have a fire lit in here. It will be smoky for a quarter of an hour. You should come down." It was an accommodation. The mezzanine sat directly above the fireplace, and he had come to tell her himself rather than send Mrs. Alton. She came down. The footman lit the fire. Verity stood at the far end of the room, ledger in hand. Nicholas stood near the door. "You grew up around books," he said. "My father was a natural philosopher. Our house had rather more books than furniture. He died 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "He was very old and extremely pleased with himself about it. I don't think he required much sympathy. A sound from Nicholas that was not quite a laugh, something shorter, but which altered the quality of the room. "The horse above the fireplace," Verity said. "My grandfather's. The horse was called Magnificent. My grandfather considered him superior to most of his acquaintance." "He sounds like a man of discernment." "He was entirely without discernment," Nicholas said, "but he was very fond of Magnificent." The smoke cleared. Verity returned to the mezzanine. The first collision arrived on a Thursday afternoon in November. She had been in the East Wing for 6 hours, working through a box of correspondence, flagging each item without reading it, when she saw the name. Mr. James Callow, natural philosopher, December 1783. Her hand stilled. She took her pen, wrote the reference in her ledger, placed the letter back in the box and sat very still with her thumb pressed to the page. She heard footsteps. The door opened. Nicholas stood in the doorway looking at the box of correspondence in front of her. "You are in here later than usual," he said. "I lost track of the time." She closed the ledger. He came further in. The room was small enough that 2 people in it constituted a proximity she would not have chosen. He looked at the box. He looked at her. "This particular box I would prefer you leave for the present. Of course, I'll continue with the shelving. I did not say you could not be in the East Wing." "I heard you." She looked up at him. "I have left it." He looked at her in the particular way that meant he was trying to find a reason to distrust what she had just said, and was not finding one. "Very well." He turned to go. "Your Grace." He stopped. "The box does contain several items of genuine scholarly interest, a pamphlet series from the 1770s, and what appears to be a manuscript. When you are ready to have it catalogued, I would be glad to continue. I'll inform you when I'm ready." He left, taking the box with him. Verity sat for another full minute, staring at the empty space where it had been. The commission party arrived on a Friday. Lord and Lady Fernsby, pleasant and interchangeable in the manner of couples married long enough to develop a common personality. A Mr. Darrell, young and loud, and in possession of opinions about horses. A Miss Holston, pretty, quiet, and watching Nicholas Thorne with the attention of a woman who had been informed she was eligible. And Colonel Whitmore, retired, who filled silences with facts. Mrs. Alton appeared at Verity's door at 5:30, with an expression of resolute neutrality. His Grace expected Miss Callow to dine with the party this evening. It would look eccentric for a gentlewoman, however employed, to eat alone in the East Wing with a house full of guests overhead. Verity, who had been hoping to avoid precisely this, accepted. She was placed midway down the table, between Colonel Whitmore and Mr. Darrell, away from the senior end, and was asked within the first quarter hour what she thought of the library. "Extraordinary," she said, which was true. "What do you do with a library that hasn't been properly catalogued in years?" Mr. Darrell asked. "Begin," said Verity. Nicholas, at the head of the table, glanced at her. It was brief. She was already looking back at Whitmore. She observed that Miss Holston attempted 3 times to draw the Duke into conversation, and succeeded once, briefly, that Nicholas ate without apparent pleasure and spoke without apparent interest, but was nonetheless listening to everything. She knew this because twice, when she said something she had not expected to carry across the table, she looked up to find him already looking somewhere else, a beat too recently. After dinner, Lady Fernsby said, "How do you find the Duke, Miss Callow?" "I find him very well." "He is not easy to know." "Most people aren't on short acquaintance." Miss Holston said, "I think he is very handsome." "Yes," said Verity agreeably, looking at the dark window. "He is very well looking." She meant it as a harmless concession. She found, briefly examining it, that she also meant it as a fact. The collision happened the following morning. She was in the library at 8, as was her custom, when the door opened at 5:30 and Nicholas walked in, still in riding clothes. He had not expected her to be there. They looked at each other across the room. "You are here early," he said. "I am always here early." He came further in and sat at the desk he used when he came in to read. She worked. For 20 minutes the room held only the sound of her pen and the occasional turn of his page. It should have been awkward, it was not. At 9:30, without looking up, he said, "The East Wing. I will have Pelham accompany you when you continue with the correspondence boxes. He can flag items before you see them." "That would slow the work considerably." "I'm aware. If you tell me what you are looking for, I can flag it myself without reading further. The question is whether you can be trusted to find it without reading everything else. She set down her pen. Your Grace, if you believe I cannot be trusted, you should discharge me. If you believe I can be trusted, you should let me do my work. He looked up. And if I believe neither? Then you are in a difficulty of your own making. He set down his book. That is not how I generally expect my employees to address me. I imagine not. I can provide the names of my previous employers if you wish to confirm I have a record of not reading private correspondence. Lord Fenwick's housekeeper is particularly forthcoming on the subject, since she spent 6 months convinced I was going to, and I never did. Nicholas looked at her for a long moment. That will not be necessary, he said. Good. Miss Callow. His voice held something dry and precise. I can replace you easily. She set down her pen. She stood. She picked up her ledger and her pen case and her reference notes, stacked them with the neatness of someone who had very good habits and intended to keep them, and walked to the door. Good morning, Your Grace, she said. She was gone before he finished whatever it was he had intended to say next. At 11:30, a knock at her door. Mrs. Alton. His Grace has asked that you continue in the East Wing as you see fit, Miss Callow. Without Mr. Pelham? Mrs. Alton's expression performed a very small, very controlled operation. Without Mr. Pelham. Thank you, Mrs. Alton. Verity sat for a moment longer, thumb pressed to her page. Then she opened the book she was not reading and read. The guest stayed a fortnight. Verity worked through it. Miss Holston did not secure the Duke's attention. Mr. Darrell broke a vase and replaced it with such contrition that Lady Fernsby said he was a dear boy. Colonel Whitmore told Verity 3 times about the siege of Seringapatam, each account slightly different. Nicholas came into the library on 4 of the 14 days, always in riding clothes, always in the manner of a man who had told himself he was going somewhere else. On the 3rd occasion he said without preamble, "What have you found in the East Wing?" A great deal. The 4th Duke had a particular interest in natural philosophy. There is a correspondence with 3 fellows of the Royal Society that would be of considerable interest to scholars. Is that what you're looking for? She looked up. I am cataloguing what is there. You know what I mean. She considered the question. She could deflect, had been deflecting competently for 6 weeks, but something in the directness of it made her feel the cost of continuing. There is a collection of personal letters from the 1780s that I have not read, she said. I have flagged them as personal correspondence. I have not opened them. But you know whose they are. I know the name on the outside. He crossed the room and stood at the shelving she was working on. He was a quiet man, not passive, but still, and she had become over 6 weeks accustomed to the quality of his attention. In the morning light, she could see his eyes were more brown than green, darker than the hazel she had first supposed. Miss Callow, if you tell me what you are looking for, I can tell you whether it is here. She thought about Thomas. I appreciate the offer, she said. It is not necessary. Why not? Because either I will find it in the course of doing my work or I will not, and in either case, I would prefer to have done nothing I cannot account for honestly. He looked at her for a long moment. That is an unusually precise moral position. I find imprecision costly. He went back to his desk, after a moment without looking up. The natural philosophy correspondence, is any of it in print? Some of it. I can note which pieces have existing editions, if that would be useful. Yes, he said, it would. They worked in silence for another hour, and it was the most natural thing that had happened to Verity in 6 weeks. The guests left on a Friday. The house exhaled. Verity was deep in the East Wing shelving when Nicholas appeared, hat in hand, 3 hours earlier than usual. I'm going to the village. Is there anything you need for the library? This had not happened before. The Japanese tissue for the folio wrapping is nearly out, she said. Mr. Pelham said he would order more, but I have not seen it arrive. I'll see to it. He was at the door. Miss Callow, the folio on the 2nd shelf, blue binding, is it what I think it is? She looked at the shelf. She had catalogued it yesterday. If you think it is Evelyn's silver, 1664, yes. A pause. Good God. It is in very good condition. Your great-great-grandfather apparently never read it. From the doorway, Nicholas made the short, reluctant sound that was not quite a laugh. She did not look up. She heard him leave. The lamp arrived the following morning, considerably better than the one she had specified, a solid brass reading lamp placed on her work table with the care of someone who had thought about precisely where it should go. Verity stood in front of it for a moment. Then she lit it and went to work. December brought shorter days, and the habit on Nicholas's part of coming to the library every morning. He did not always speak. Sometimes he read for an hour and left without exchanging more than a nod. But the nod meant something. It meant he had decided she was allowed to be there in the same way he was, which was not a small thing from a man who apparently allowed very little. On the third Wednesday of December, he came in and stopped below the mezzanine railing with his head tilted back. "You have the look of someone doing arithmetic." "I am checking my count. 1,142 bound volumes catalogued, with approximately 300 remaining in the East Wing, not including maps, folios, loose manuscripts and prints, which will require a separate register. 6 months was optimistic." "Who said 14? "I was being conservative." She came down. It had become entirely natural now. 11 to 12 months if the East Wing correspondence is as dense as I expect. He sat at his desk. "Will you still be here in 11 months? "That depends on whether I find what I'm looking for." He looked back at her. They had arrived at this edge several times and had each time veered away. This time neither of them veered. "Miss Callow," he said, "I know you are not simply cataloguing my library." "I am cataloguing your library," she said. "I am also looking for something." "The letters?" "Yes." "Whose?" She had planned for this conversation. Now that it was here, the planned versions all felt like performances, and she was tired of performing. "My father's," she said. "He corresponded with someone who donated a collection to your grandfather's library. The letters establish my brother's legitimacy. I was not going to read them without your permission." "But you were going to find them first and ask permission after." "Yes." He stood and moved to the window with less light. "You could have written and explained." "I judged the probability of success to be very low. Men with libraries and titles do not generally open their private holdings to strangers who want something from them." He turned from the window. "And if I have them brought to you now and you read them and they establish what you need, what then?" "Then I continue cataloguing your library for as long as you wish, since I took a commission, and I keep my commissions." He crossed his arms, not defensive but considering. "You are very calm about this." "I am not calm about this. I have been extremely anxious for 6 weeks. I have simply been calm-looking, which is a different thing." Something shifted in his face, a small movement at the corner that lasted perhaps a second. "I will have Pelham find the letters," he said. "You may read them in my presence." "That is acceptable." "Miss Callow, in future, if you want something from me, you may ask directly." "I will remember that," she said. She thought, and did not say, that she would also remember the fact that he had not been angry. The letters were found within a day. Nicholas sat at his desk. She sat at hers. He did not read over her shoulder. Her father had written 6 letters to a solicitor named Hemworth in Dorset, describing in his characteristic tone, precise, discursive, liable to digress about the quality of local light, a marriage conducted on the 14th of October, 1800, in a village church, witnessed by the parish clerk and a woman named Mrs. Pott. Thomas had been born in 1801. Verity read them twice. She set them down. She pressed her thumb to her ledger page for a moment without writing anything. Nicholas from his desk said nothing. He had not turned a page in 20 minutes. "They are what I needed," she said. "Good. I'll have Pelham arrange documentation." He paused. "Take the originals. I'll have copies made for the archive." She looked at him. "Your brother needs them more than my library does," he said, apparently reading. "That is very generous." "It is practical." He turned a page. "Write your weekly report. You are 2 days late." She wrote her report. Christmas brought Nicholas's 2 sisters. The elder Mrs. Pemberley was warm and sharp and asked questions. The younger Miss Thorne, still unmarried at 19, watched everything with the attention of someone taking notes. After dinner, Mrs. Pemberley sat beside Verity with a glass of wine and said, without preamble, "He likes you. I work for him." "Yes, and he does not have his other employees to dinner or arrange for lamps to be delivered or come to the library every morning when he has guests." She looked at Verity over her glass. "He does not know how to do it except sideways. I had noticed he approaches most things indirectly." "He learned to," said Mrs. Pemberley. She did not elaborate. Miss Thorne from across the room said, "Is it true you found a first edition of Evelyn?" "Yes." Nicholas read the whole thing in 2 days. He said it was the best thing in the library. She paused. "He has 4,000 items in that library, if you count all the maps and folios and oddments, so that is a very strong claim. Verity kept her expression neutral. She had not known he had read it. January brought snow and the information, delivered by Mrs. Alton at breakfast, that His Grace would be in London for a fortnight on estate business. Verity catalogued. She worked through the East Wing in his absence with a focus that was less like discipline and more like the absence of distraction, and she had been aware enough of herself to find that diagnostic. She found on a Thursday afternoon a correspondence between the third Duke and a woman who signed herself only as C, running from 1751 to 1763, either a great friendship or a love affair conducted in the oblique language of people who knew their letters might be read. She flagged it in her reference ledger, C, identity unknown, correspondence of considerable historical interest. Recommend discussion with His Grace re. disposition. She was writing the flag when she heard the door. Nicholas Thorne, back from London 3 days early, stood in the doorway of the East Wing looking at what she had done with his archive in a fortnight. The shelving complete, the boxes sorted, stacked, labelled, the cross-reference notebook built on the side table. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. "Good God," he said. The shelving took most of it. He came in slowly, pulled a box from the stack, examined her labelling. "You have been busy. You were not here to interrupt me." "I need to speak to you," he said. "I've been in a carriage for 6 hours. Come to the library in an hour." She came. He had changed and eaten, and was sitting at his desk with a glass of something amber. "In London," he said. "I looked into the Hemworth correspondence. The solicitor died in 1809. His papers went to his son, now in Bath. The marriage register from the church in Dorset was destroyed in a flood in 1805. Your father's letters may be the only documentary evidence of the marriage." She had known this was a possibility. Hearing it stated plainly was a different thing. "Your brother has a solicitor." "Mr. Cranfield in Bristol." "He should write to Hemworth's son in Bath. The son may have correspondence of his own from that period, and the bishop's transcripts may not have been destroyed. Those are held separately." He picked up his glass. "I asked my solicitor to make inquiries." "You asked your solicitor to make inquiries on behalf of my brother?" "On behalf of a potentially legitimate inheritance." He was watching the fire. "It's the kind of thing solicitors do." "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because your brother should not lose an inheritance because a church flooded." A pause. He set his glass down. "In London I was asked several times when Marne Hall was to be opened for the season. I would prefer to remain here." He was not looking at her. "The East Wing correspondence. You cannot complete it without assistance." "I had planned to complete it without assistance." "The C correspondence, you flagged it for discussion." "We could discuss it by letter." "We could," he said. "It would be less efficient." He was looking at his glass with a seriousness entirely disproportionate to its contents. "The East Wing will take another 3 months, she said. "I know. Miss Halston will be at the season." He looked up. "Miss Halston is entirely irrelevant." The fire made a small sound. "The East Wing," she said. 3 months, then London." "Presumably." She stood. "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night. Then, Miss Callow, the C's correspondence, do you have a theory about who she was?" Verity paused at the door. She did have a theory. She had been saving it because it was more interesting to discuss than to declare. "I have several," she said. "We can discuss them when you've had some sleep." She heard the short, reluctant sound that was not quite a laugh. She closed the door and walked back to the East Wing with her ledger, and did not think, with any particular discipline, about the man she had left sitting by a fire in a room he was sharing with her for no reason. He had been willing to state plainly. She thought about it a little. February arrived with a decision. The bishop's transcripts existed. Nicholas's solicitor found them in a diocesan archive in Salisbury. Name, date, church, officiant, precisely as her father's letters had described. Nicholas conveyed this at breakfast, the first time he had appeared at breakfast in 3 months. He set a letter in front of her without preamble and went to pour his coffee. Verity read it twice, set it down. Thomas was legitimate, had always been, could now prove it. "Your solicitor has been thorough," she said. "He is paid to be thorough. Cranfield is handling the attestation. I wrote to him last week." She looked at him. "You wrote to my brother's solicitor?" "I provided the relevant documents." He sat across from her. He looked at the window. "Is there anything remaining for you to do in the East Wing?" "The seed correspondence," she said, and 2 boxes of acquisition records. Then you should stay, he said to the window. She pressed her thumb to her ledger. The C correspondence is genuinely interesting, she said. I should not like to leave it half-finished. He looked back from the window. The small change in his face lasted perhaps a second. No, he said, that would be untidy. A moment earlier, he had said something else. Said it to his coffee with the tone of a man making a concession he had considered for some time. We have been working in the same room for 4 months. The formality is becoming artificial. Nicholas, she said now, trying it. Yes. Thank you. You are welcome. He picked up his coffee. They discussed the C correspondence on a Tuesday. Verity had brought her notes. Nicholas had apparently read the letters overnight because he arrived with opinions. Her theory, C was the 3rd Duke's cousin, married to another man living in Edinburgh, and the correspondence was precisely the great friendship it claimed to be. The domestic detail, Scottish winters, books, children's educations, did not read like concealment. Nicholas's theory, the friendship was also a love affair, and the correspondence was the limit of what was possible. The books, he said. She asks for specific books in every letter. He sends them. In 12 years, she never once says she has read one. Verity stopped. The books were the message, he said. She asked and he sent. That was the correspondence. She looked at the letter open between them. He was right. She had read the words and missed what was underneath. My grandmother had a correspondence like that, he said. The letters were destroyed when she died. She left instructions. I always thought that was sad. Hence the library, said Verity. He looked at her. The first time she had offered an interpretation of him to his face, he did not deflect. Possibly, he said. They went to London in mid-February separately, as was correct. Verity stayed with Thomas in Marylebone. Nicholas went to Thornhouse in Grosvenor Square. Thomas, when she showed him the diocesan transcript, sat very still for a long time. That's it, he said. That is it. How much of this did you arrange by yourself? Most of it. I had some assistants. Whose? The Duke of Marne has solicitors. Thomas looked at her with the expression of a young man recalibrating. You catalogued his library for how long? 5 months. Verity, are you... I am going to make you some tea, she said, standing, and then we are going to discuss what Cranfield needs from you next. She felt his eyes on her back while she made it. When she turned around, he had the look he always had when he had understood something she had not told him. She had told him approximately 30% of the relevant information, lower than usual. London had its own social machinery, and into it, Verity discovered, a woman working for the Duke of Marne was fed immediately. Mrs. Pemberley included her in 2 calls, 1 dinner, and a card party, at which she found herself beside Lady Frome, perhaps 60 and appearing to feel this granted her certain liberties. Nicholas has not spent a winter in Wiltshire since his mother died, Lady Frome said. The library required attention. The library has required attention for years. It is notable that this year he found someone to attend to it. She looked at Verity with frank assessment. You are not at all what I expected. What I am saying, Lady Frome continued, playing a card, is that the man who learned distrust was worth having is not the man who existed before he learned it. It is useful to know there was a before. He has not told me anything about himself, Verity said. No, said Lady Frome, he wouldn't. That's why I am. She met Nicholas at a musical evening in Berkeley Square, arranged, she noted, by Mrs. Pemberley, who did not appear to do anything accidentally. Thomas managed a passable bow. Nicholas was civil, then looked at Verity with an expression that meant, I knew she would do this, and referred to his sister. Your brother, Nicholas said when Thomas had been drawn away, is very like you. He is considerably more anxious. He does not hide it as well as you do. I have had more practice at looking like I am not feeling what I am feeling. That, he said, is a skill I'm also familiar with. The music began. They were standing near the window, which left them slightly at the edge of things. Lady Frome spoke to me at the Percivals, Verity said. I can imagine what she said. She said there was a before whatever made you the way you are, and that it was worth knowing. He was silent. I am not asking you to explain yourself, she said. I am telling you because she was right that it was useful. How was it useful? It made me understand that your mistrust is not your nature. It is what you concluded from experience, which means it is not necessarily permanent. He was quiet for a long moment. The music played. "And what is my nature?" he said. She turned and looked at him directly. Someone who reads 12 years of letters in one night, who noticed a folio that had been on a shelf for 30 years, who asked his solicitor to look for a transcript for a woman he has known for 5 months. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. "Miss Callow," he said. "Verity," she said, "since the formality is becoming artificial." His expression shifted, a small softening at the edges of something that usually did not soften. "Verity," he said, with the care of a man saying a name he has thought about more than he has said. "The East Wing," she said, giving them both a way back to steadier ground. "Is there more I should know before I continue?" He took it. "There are journals in a box marked drawing supplies on the bottom shelf. I put them there when I was 19 and should like to remove them before you find them." "Journals of whose?" "Mine," he said, with the dignity of a man who has surrendered something and intends to maintain composure about it. "They are extremely dull." "I will leave the bottom shelf for last," she said, "as a professional courtesy." "Thank you." He sounded for the first time slightly embarrassed. She found it against all discipline charming. "The sea correspondence," she said. "Your theory was right. There is a letter in 1763, the last year, where she says she has read a book, finally." She paused. She read it when the letters stopped. "When he died," he said. "Yes." They stood at the edge of the room while the music played, and she was aware of the fact that she was standing close enough to feel the warmth of him, and that this had become a comfortable distance rather than an inappropriate one. A couple moved past them. Nicholas shifted, not away, but redirected. His arm came briefly close to hers. Neither of them moved. "I think," he said quietly, "that she read all of them, that she always knew what they meant, and she chose to let the letters say what the letters said, and the books say what the books said, and she counted both things as real. That is a generous reading. I think she was a generous woman." The music ended. Thomas appeared at Verity's elbow. She turned to Nicholas. "Good night," she said. "Good night. I will call on Thomas tomorrow. There are documents Cranfield requires a signature on." She left. Thomas on the pavement said nothing for a full minute. Then, "He is not at all what I expected." "No," said Verity, "he isn't." She looked at the street ahead, dark and cold, and she was thinking about a woman in Edinburgh who had counted two things as real at once. Her thumb was pressed, habit and instinct, to the edge of her glove, marking a place she hadn't yet decided whether to turn from. She was very close to setting it down. Nicholas called on Thomas the following morning, as promised, with 2 documents requiring signature and a third requiring a witness. Verity witnessed it. Thomas signed with the careful hand of a man who had spent years writing letters he was not sure mattered and was now writing one that did. When it was done, Thomas offered coffee. Nicholas accepted, which surprised Verity, who had expected him to leave. They sat in Thomas's small book-crowded sitting room, Thomas on the settee, Nicholas in the only armchair not occupied by a stack of journals, and Thomas, who was either braver than Verity had estimated or simply too relieved to be careful, said, "Miss Callow tells me you have an extraordinary library." "Miss Callow has been extremely patient with it," Nicholas said. "She has always been patient with libraries. She used to read our father's correspondence when she was 8. He didn't mind. He said she had better instincts than most of his colleagues." "I can believe that," Nicholas said. "She also has a habit," Thomas said, with the ease of a man who had grown up with someone and accumulated evidence, "of being in the middle of something and refusing to put it down. She holds her place with her thumb, even when she ought to stop." Verity looked at the window. "I've noticed," said Nicholas. A small silence. Thomas looked between them with the expression of a young man who had understood something. "Well," Thomas said cheerfully, "the coffee will be cold." The season assembled itself around them. Verity attended events with Mrs. Pemberley, who was a generous and strategically minded hostess, and found herself navigating a social landscape she had not inhabited since her father's death had reduced their circumstances to something more angular. Nicholas was at approximately half the events she attended. This was, she told herself, coincidence. London in season was not large, and his sister was involved in the planning of most of these evenings. That he was reliably present at the ones she attended was not a pattern. It was a sample size. She was very good at lying to herself when she needed to be. At the Arlingtons' dinner in the 3rd week of March, she was seated far enough from Nicholas that they did not speak through the meal. She watched him periodically across the table. He was talking to a Mrs. Hartwell on his left. Pleasant woman, recently widowed, with the brittle brightness of someone making a great effort. He was not charming exactly. He was attentive. She could see it from across the table, the quality of listening she had learned to identify at Marne, directed at someone who needed it. After dinner in the drawing-room, Lady Frome appeared at her elbow. "You have been watching him," she said without preliminary. "I have been observing the room." "Miss Callow, I am 64 years old and I have been watching people at dinner parties since before you were born. You have been watching him." Verity looked at her. "What would you like me to say?" "Nothing to me," Lady Frome said. "I'm simply noting that whatever you are holding your place in, it may be time to read the next page." She moved away. Nicholas appeared at Verity's side approximately 3 minutes later, which was either coincidence or he had extracted himself from Mrs. Hartwell at some cost. "Lady Frome," he said. "Is very forthcoming," said Verity. "She has been very forthcoming for 40 years. My mother adored her." "She said your mother was heroic." He looked at the room. She was, in ways that were not visible. It was the most direct thing he had said about his family. She did not push it. "There is a lecture at the Royal Institution on Thursday," she said. "Natural philosophy. Thomas wants to go and would prefer not to go alone." Nicholas turned his head. "And you?" "I would not object to going." "Then I'll come. Thomas should not go to lectures alone. He will argue with the lecturer and require management." "You have met him twice." "He argued with me about the diocesan records," he said. "He was not wrong, which made it worse." She smiled. It was not a careful smile. She saw him see it. The lecture was on Tuesday. The lecturer was enthusiastic and somewhat imprecise, which Thomas found unbearable, and which Nicholas watched with the restrained amusement of a man at a sporting event. Verity sat between them and monitored Thomas's expression as a precaution. Afterward, on the pavement outside, Thomas said, "He was wrong about the refractive index." "Dramatically wrong," Nicholas agreed. "Someone should have said something." "You said 3 things," Verity said, quietly. "Thomas, you were audible from the 3rd row." Nicholas said, "The woman in front of us agreed with you. She nodded twice, once at the refractive index and once when you said the methodology was borrowed from Herschel." Thomas looked delighted. "Who was she?" "I have no idea, but she appeared to know her optics." Thomas set off toward Marylebone in excellent spirits. Verity and Nicholas stood on the pavement in the particular way of 2 people who have been walking with a third and are now without a logical direction. "Walk?" Nicholas said. "Yes," said Verity. They walked. London at 8 o'clock in March was cold but not unpleasant, the streets lit and busy, and they walked with no particular destination, which was a thing she had not done with anyone in some time. "So you are not going back to Wiltshire?" he said. "Not quite a question. Not until Thomas's matter is fully resolved. Another fortnight, Cranfield thinks." "And after that?" She looked at the street ahead. "I have other commissions. Lord Fenwick's grandson is apparently considering a reorganization. In Bath." He was quiet for half a street. "I have been thinking about what Lady Frome told you." "Which part?" "The before." He stopped walking. She stopped a pace ahead of him and turned. They were on a quiet stretch of street, lit poorly, and his face in the half-dark was the less guarded version she had learned to look for. "Someone used your trust," she said. "Not a question." "Several people, over some years. The last was someone I had intended to marry." He paused. "She found the title useful. That was the whole of it. When I understood that, I spent some time deciding what to believe about people in general." "And you decided to believe the worst?" "So I decided to wait for evidence." He looked at her steadily. "The difficulty is that you arrived with evidence of your own motives before I could collect any. You told me exactly what you wanted and why, which made it difficult to maintain the usual distance. You managed it for some time." "I am persistent," he said. "Also wrong on this occasion." "What are you wrong about?" "That everyone's motives are suspect." A pause. "Yours are not." "My motives," she said carefully, "include 5 months of deliberate concealment about why I was there." "So you concealed the method. The motive was always your brother." He looked at the street. "You told me plainly. Most people do not tell me plainly. I did not know what to do with it." She was quiet for a moment. The street was quiet too. "What do you want to do with it now?" she said. He turned back to her, close enough that she could see his expression fully, not the careful version, not the guarded one, the one she had seen at the musical evening when he had said her name for the first time. "I don't know how to do this without being clumsy about it," he said. "You have not been clumsy about anything," she said. "You arranged a lamp, you found a transcript, you went to a Tuesday lecture about optics. Anyone might have done those things." "Nicholas." She said his name with the precision he had used for hers at the beginning. He stilled. "What is it that you want to say?" He was quiet for a moment, then, "I would like for you not to go to Bath." She held his gaze. "That is not entirely within your control." "No, I know, I am not ordering, I am asking." The word cost him something. She could see it. It was the most unguarded thing he had done in 6 months of being very careful. "What would I do," she said, "if I did not go to Bath?" He looked at her for a long moment, with the care of a man checking that he has arrived somewhere after a long journey. "I would like to continue what we are doing, in whatever form you find acceptable." She thought about this sea correspondence, about a woman in Edinburgh who had let two things be true at once and counted both as real. She took one step forward, close enough that looking up at him required a slight tilt. His eyes in this light were dark, more brown than anything, and looking at her with an attention she was now quite certain had nothing to do with a library. "I find most forms acceptable," she said. He kissed her. It was brief and careful and very deliberate, which was exactly what she would have expected from him, and she kissed him back with the directness that was exactly what he would have expected from her, and when it ended, they stood on the quiet London street, in the particular silence of two people who have arrived somewhere. Neither of them had said they were going. "Well," said Nicholas. "Yes," said Verity. "I should walk you home. Thomas's lodgings are in the other direction." "I know which direction they are in." She turned and he walked beside her, and neither of them said anything for a full street, which was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in 6 months. He called the following morning, not on Thomas, on Verity. Mrs. Tilby, Thomas's housekeeper, showed him to the sitting room with the poorly suppressed excitement of a woman who felt strongly that Miss Callow had been working too hard for too long. Verity came down to find Nicholas standing at the window, the one with less light because he always chose that one, holding his hat. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He set his hat on the table. "I have come to ask you something. I intended to ask it last night and did not." "You were occupied," she said. His expression did the small shift. "I was." He looked at her. "I am going to ask you to marry me, and I want to be clear that you should say no if you don't wish to, because this is a great deal to arrive at quickly, and I would rather you refuse me plainly than accept out of any sense of—" "Nicholas," she said. He stopped. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes. Yes." A moment in which the room was very quiet. "That was faster than I expected," he said. "I have been in the same room as you for 6 months," she said. "I am familiar with the relevant information." He came across the room. He stood close enough that they were looking at each other at a range that required a decision, and she made it by tilting her face up, and he made it by meeting her. This time it was less brief. Thomas, who had been pretending to read in the next room, made a sound that was not quite a cough and was entirely unconvincing. Nicholas went to speak to Thomas, who agreed immediately, and then worried about whether he had agreed too fast. Nicholas said Thomas could ask whatever he liked. Thomas asked 4 questions, 3 about Verity's independence in the marriage, and 1 about the library, specifically whether she would be allowed to continue her work. Nicholas said yes to all 4. "She will tell you the same thing," Thomas said, "but I wanted to hear it from you." "I know," said Nicholas. Thomas shook his hand. Then, "She has been managing everything alone for 4 years. I want her to have someone who notices." "I notice," Nicholas said. "I know," said Thomas. "That's why I said yes." They were married in April, at the beginning of the season rather than the end, in a church in Mayfair that was smaller than the occasion but had better light. Mrs. Pemberley wept in the tasteful manner of someone who had very much wanted this to happen. Thomas stood in the front pew with the expression of a man who has had a very long year and has arrived at the good part. Lady Frome in the 3rd row said to the woman beside her, "I gave them until June, I was wrong." Verity wore her mother's pearls. Nicholas, at the front of the church, watched her come down the aisle with an expression that was not the careful one. The wedding breakfast was at Thorn House, which was large enough to contain 30 guests, and a sense of occasion without either bursting. Mr. Darrell, who had been at Marne in November and seemed genuinely surprised by events, cornered Verity near the windows. "I thought you were cataloguing the library," he said. "I was," said Verity. "And now you're the Duchess of Marne." "Cataloguing was thorough work," she said. He looked baffled in the cheerful way of a man who does not need to understand things to be happy about them. "Well, congratulations." She found Nicholas across the room by simple orientation, the way she had developed over months of knowing where he was without tracking him. He was talking to Lady Frome with the expression of a man being told something he finds equal parts irritating and true. She arrived at his side. Lady Frome looked at her with satisfaction. "I was telling him," Lady Frome said, "that I expect you both for dinner on Wednesday." "We'd be delighted," Verity said. "Wednesday," Nicholas said, "we are going back to Marne." "Thursday, then. It is a 3-hour drive. Excuses." She moved away. "She is indefatigable," Nicholas said. "Yes," said Verity, "I like her." He looked down at her with the look she had seen on the street in March. Unguarded, present. "Marne on Wednesday." "The East Wing," she said. "The bottom shelf." He closed his eyes briefly. "I had hoped you had forgotten." "I have never forgotten anything in my professional life." "This is no longer professional. The journals predate our acquaintance. They are of historical interest." "They are of no interest to anyone." "They are of interest to me." He looked at her. She looked back with the steady patience she had been directing at interesting problems her entire adult life. "They are very dull," he said. "I'll be the judge of that." He took her hand. They were married, it was their wedding breakfast, he was permitted, and held it with the care of a man who has not held many things and intends to be careful with this one. "Thursday," he said. "We are going to Lady Frome's on Wednesday." "Naturally," she said. Lady Frome's on Wednesday was excellent. Marne on Thursday was better. Mrs. Alton met them at the door with an expression as close to delight as Mrs. Alton appeared to permit herself. The house was warm, fires lit in the expected rooms, and the library, when Verity looked in on her way to change, was exactly as she had left it. The lamp on the work table, the cross-reference notebook on the side table, the mezzanine undisturbed. Nicholas appeared behind her. "The East Wing," she said. Tonight we have dinner." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the library with an expression she had not seen before, not careful, not guarded, not the unguarded version from the London street. Something quieter. The face, she thought, of a man who was simply at home. "Tomorrow," she agreed. They had dinner. Mrs. Alton had felt the occasion warranted effort, and sat at the long table that was absurd for 2 people and talked about the Seed correspondence and about Thomas's plans for the estate and about the Evelyn first edition, which Nicholas had read twice and wanted to discuss. "Are you sorry to have been interrupted?" he said, refilling her glass. She looked at him across the table. "I found what I was looking for," she said. "The interruptions were worth it." He said nothing. The small shift happened at the corner of his face. "The journals," she said gently. "Tomorrow," he said. "You keep saying tomorrow." "I am the Duke of Marne," he said with perfect gravity. "I am permitted to delay things." "You are the Duke of Marne, married to the woman who organized your East Wing. Delays will be noted." He looked at her. Then, for the first time in her experience, Nicholas Thorne laughed. Not the short, reluctant sound, but an actual laugh, brief and real, which transformed his face entirely. "Tomorrow," he said, still smiling. "Tomorrow," she agreed. The journals were, as promised, somewhat dull. They were also not dull at all. The Nicholas who had written them at 19 was recognizable, precise, observational, with the dry edge that had survived into adulthood, but not yet guarded. He had written about books and the estate and his father, who appeared to have been exactly as Lady Frome had described, handsome, well-meaning and somewhat blank, with a clarity that was more forensic than unkind. He had written in one entry Verity read twice, "She burned them herself the week before she died. I asked her why. She said some things are private. I said I thought she was wrong. She said I would understand when I was older. I am beginning to think she meant I would understand when I had something worth protecting." Verity set the journal down. She looked at the East Wing around her, the shelves she had catalogued, the boxes she had sorted, the lamp on the table. Nicholas appeared in the doorway. "Well," he said. "You were very young," she said. "I was 19. You wrote that your grandmother burned her letters because some things are private, and then you built a library." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. the considering posture, not the defensive one. "You spent 20 years building an archive of other people's correspondences," she said, "because you understood that some things are lost, and you were angry about it." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is a generous reading." "It is also accurate." "Possibly," he said. She picked up the journal. She looked at the entry once more. Then she set it down flat on the table, properly, pages closed, and looked at him. He saw it. He knew what it meant by now. "The East Wing is finished," she said. "Good," he said. "Come out of the East Wing." She came out of the East Wing. The first year of marriage was nothing like Verity had expected, and entirely like she should have known it would be. Nicholas was not easy. He never became easy. He was private in the mornings and present in the evenings, had opinions about everything, and kept most of them until asked, then produced them with the precision of a man who had been thinking since before the question. He rode every morning, and came into the library every afternoon, and the distinction between his desk and her chair had long since collapsed into a shared use of space that was, she thought, a more honest description of a marriage than most she had observed. They went to London for the season, and came back when the season ended. Lady Frome gave them a standing Wednesday invitation that neither party acknowledged as what it was. Thomas completed the legal process by June, and took up residence in their father's estate in Devon, from which he wrote letters of great length and moderate anxiety. Nicholas read the letters she showed him and said reliably, "He is not wrong about that," or "He will sort it out." He was almost always correct. She catalogued the library. By the end of the first year, the main collection had a complete inventory. By the end of the second, she had published a monograph on the fourth Duke's natural philosophy correspondence, reviewed favourably in 3 periodicals and unfavourably in 1, by a man who had himself wanted access to the collection and been refused. Nicholas read the unfavourable review. "He's wrong about the methodology." "He is wrong about the methodology," Verity agreed. "Write a response." "I have written a response." Good. He had read the monograph before submission, the first time she had shown him something she had written with something at stake. He returned it with 3 penciled observations in the margin. 2 were right. 1 was magnificently wrong, and she told him so. And he considered her argument for a full 20 minutes and conceded. She kept the monograph. She did not point out that his marginalia made it a collector's item. He would have found that insufferable. Their daughter was born in the 2nd year of their marriage in October, a better month than Verity had previously given it credit for. She was dark-haired and loud, which Nicholas appeared to find both alarming and excellent. They named her Catherine, after the grandmother who had burned her letters. Nicholas held her in the library 2 days after she was born, standing at the window with less light, with the careful attention of a man who has been trusted with something he finds remarkable. Verity in her chair watched him. "She has your eyes," he said. "She has no discernible features yet." "She has your eyes," he said, with the certainty of a man who has decided and will not be argued with. Verity let him have it. The library at Marne was, in the November of 1833, a room that had been thoroughly catalogued, impeccably maintained, and lived in, which was more than it had been for a very long time. The East Wing held Catherine's drawings in the lower shelves. She was 9 and prolific, and a collection of shells belonging to James, who was 6 and had not yet found a satisfactory system for organizing them, a problem Verity had declined to solve on the grounds that some problems were educational. The newest acquisition, William, was to and currently forbidden the library on the grounds that he had, on his last visit, eaten a page of the 1764 Evelyn, a crime for which there was no fully adequate consequence. Nicholas had found this less funny than Verity had, which was a reversal of their usual positions. Verity was at her work table when Nicholas came in and sat at his desk. She was working on her current monograph, a history of the Marne collection itself, and had been for the better part of the morning, which was a comfortable kind of silence between 2 people who had long since learned to inhabit the same room without requiring it to mean anything beyond what it was. "Thomas writes," he said. "I know. I read it this morning. He is considering a 2nd expedition. He is always considering a 2nd expedition. This time he has a sponsor." She looked up. Thomas had spent the last 3 years becoming, to his own considerable surprise, a naturalist of some reputation, a direction their father would have found perfectly logical and which had grown in ways Verity had not anticipated from the security of the inheritance and the library access. Nicholas had quietly arranged in those first 2 years. "Which sponsor?" she said. "The Royal Society, and a private one he declines to name. He names everyone in his letters. He is constitutionally incapable of omitting a person." "Read it yourself," Nicholas said. She came and took the letter from his desk. The private sponsor was unnamed, but described as a gentleman of Wiltshire, with strong opinions about optics and a tendency to be right about things. She looked at her husband. He was reading. He had not looked up. "Nicholas," she said. "The private sponsor. Thomas needs proper equipment," he said to his book. "The Royal Society will not fund a chronometer." "You are funding a chronometer." "I am funding good science." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire was lit. He had stopped waiting for cold weather to light it some years ago, and now had it going whenever he was in the library, which she suspected had always been the point. "You are a good man," she said. He turned a page. "I am a practical one." "You are being both. Thomas will publish. The collection will receive proper acknowledgement. It is mutually beneficial." He looked up. "Nicholas." She was looking at him with the look she had, the one that was not professional, not patient, but the one that had arrived in the first year and never fully left. He put his book down. "The East Wing," she said, "produced good things." "The East Wing was a disaster." "It produced me." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it did." She went back to her table. She opened her ledger and read the sentence she had been working on before Thomas's letter had arrived, the sentence about the fourth Duke and the shape of his acquisitions, the argument she was trying to make about what a man's library said about him when he was not present to speak for himself. She picked up her pen. She considered the sentence. She read it aloud. Thorne accumulated over 4 decades what no single decade could have produced. From across the room, without looking up from his own reading, Nicholas said, "Assembled. Accumulated implies excess. Assembled implies intention." She looked at the sentence. He was right. "Assembled," she said. "Yes. Thank you." "You are welcome." He turned a page. "Write faster. Fenwick's grandson will publish before you do." "Fenwick's grandson has no access to this collection." "No," said Nicholas, "he doesn't." She changed the word and read the sentence again, better now, and moved to the next one. Outside, Catherine's voice carried from the garden. She was arguing with James, which she always won, and which James never acknowledged. Somewhere in the house, William was either sleeping or creating an incident. The house had acquired over 11 years, the sound of itself being inhabited, which was different from the silence she had arrived to. Nicholas was reading. She was writing. The lamp was lit. The fire was lit. Magnificent. The horse looked down from above the fireplace with the expression of a horse who had outlasted every generation that found him funny and intended to outlast several more. She wrote a sentence, she crossed it out, she wrote it again, better. She did not press her thumb to the page. She had not done it in years, had not needed to. There was nothing she was holding her place against, no point from which she might be pulled away. She had set it down somewhere in the first year, quietly, without ceremony, and had not found the need to pick it up again.